Hi, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my craft room. I'm so excited that I am a guest designer for this month and next with Pretty Pink Posh. So I have quite a few of the new release goodies, and I'm going to use them today to create a shaker card. So these are some of the new products: Winter Wishes script dies, Mitten shaker dies, layered snowflake stencils, and the beautiful Winter Snowflakes clay confetti mix. And I'm going to use all of these new products for today's shaker card. So we're going to start with the mitten shaker dies, and I just want to cut the little fuzzy cuff of this mitten out of some white cardstock. So I'm using some mint tape to keep that in place, and I ran it through my die cut machine. I just put it along the edge because, again, I didn't want to waste any of my white paper as I only needed the cuff part. And then I'm going to cut my snowflake out of this kind of tealy blue color. I thought it matched really well with the winter snowflakes mix, so I went with that for my rest of my mitten. I'm going to cut my Winter Wishes sentiment out of some white cardstock, but I wanted it to actually be silver. So I'm grabbing some of the new Hurley Lunar paste in silver lining, and I'm just going to grab my little scraper, and I'm just going to put this right onto some white cardstock. I use my die, the Winter Wishes sentiment script die, multiple times to see if what I've laid down of this lunar paste is enough, and it will die cut in that silver color. So I'm just spreading the color all the way across the white cardstock, again making sure I have plenty on this piece so when it dries I can die cut my sentiment and it will have a beautiful silver shimmer to it. This new lunar paste from Hurley and Ranger Ink is a very beautiful stencil paste, and I think it's so great that you can customize your own metallic paper using this lunar paste on just some plain cardstock. So once I'm all done, I'm just going to scrape up any of the extra and put it back into my little jar of lunar paste and just clean up my desk so I can move on to the next part of the card. As I'm going to be using lunar paste on my background as well, I knew I needed to get that done so I can set it aside to dry while I'm working on the shaker part of this card. So I opened up the layered snowflake stencils, and there is an A, B, and C. So I'm going to start with the A, and I am making a mini slimline card. So I have some Kraft cardstock, and it's a little bit larger than the pattern on the stencil. So that was me just kind of figuring out and making sure that I was okay with not having a full image all the way up to the top of my Kraft cardstock. And I knew that I could figure out a way to be fine with it. So I am placing my Kraft cardstock all the way to the left and bottom edges of the design on the stencil, which leaves about a 1/4 inch of a border of the stencil. So I'm using some mint tape to keep that craft paper in place, and then I'm going to grab some distress oxide. So the first color I'm using is Salvaged Patina, and I'm just using my domed foam applicators to put some of that ink through the large snowflakes on the A, or the first stencil for this layered stenciled set. And once I finish adding all those snowflakes, I lined up the second stencil, again leaving about a 1/4 inch on the left and bottom, and I use some broken china on the large snowflakes, and that will give us a 2 different kind of tones of this like bluishy teal color on the background. I'm grabbing a cloth and I'm just cleaning up any on the stencil around those little dots in the second layer of my stencil because I'm going to actually add some white ink. So I'm grabbing my Shark Tooth Ink on 3 white ink pad, using another dome foam applicator, and just adding in some white ink into those little spots. So that way we'd have 3 different colors. So I'm doing 2 different colors on this second stencil. So that broken china for the snowflakes and the white ink for the little spots on the stencil. So here you can see how it's looking. I'm loving this flurry so far. I've just been really enjoying stenciling on Kraft cardstock. So I am loving this blue on Kraft look. I'm adding that third stencil, again lining up the design to the left and bottom and leaving that 1/4 inch around the stencil. And now it's time to add in more of that lunar paste. So I am going to block off any of the areas where I don't want lunar paste to get, and then grabbing my little palette knife and just adding some of that silver lining lunar paste on the openings of those last bit of snowflakes where it will overlap onto my Kraft cardstock. It's pretty quick because there's not a lot of images, and I wipe up the extra and put it away into my container so I don't waste any of my Lunar paste. And here it is peeled up. Look how beautiful those colors with that silver on that Kraft cardstock looks. I'm loving it. I think all of my Christmas cards from here on out are just going to be blue and white on Kraft with silver. So now those are drying, let's work on the shaker part of the card. Now, if you want to cut out your acetate to fit nicely behind this little mitten, I'm just grabbing some acetate. This is from scrapbook.com, and I am going to cut around the inside portion of the mitten that die cut out. And it's about a 1/4 inch all the way around the mitten. So I'm doing my best to cut around my mitten shape, not going any larger than a 1/4 inch around that mitten shape. I hope that made sense. If you need me to explain that more in a future video, please just let me know in the comments. So my acetate fits perfectly behind my window. It's not going to stick out in any places around the mitten. And if it did, not a big deal. You could just trim it down. And I'm grabbing some 1/8 of an inch double-sided adhesive tape, and I'm just going to go all the way around my mitten and then a straight line right where the mitten meets the cuff. And I'm going to peel all of that up, and then I'm going to grab that acetate mitten that I just cut out, and I'm going to line it up to create the window of my shaker. So I'm going to use that little kind of V spot of my mitten where the thumb and the rest of the mitten lines up to kind of guide where I'm placing that acetate, and it lined up perfectly. I know that I need to cover that little spot that I accidentally went outside of my stencil with the Salvaged Patina ink, but that's okay because I knew I was going to place my mitten at the top. So just making sure I was happy with how everything was looking. Now I have that white cuff that I cut out first thing, so I'm trimming off the extra where it kind of goes into the mitten part, and then I'm adding some wet glue and I'm going to adhere that on top of the blue teal mitten that I cut out. So that way it looks kind of like a blue mitten with a white fuzzy cuff. Now the mitten die is also come with a snowflake, so I die cut that out of some white cardstock, and I'm going to use some wet glue to adhere that down. I'm just going to put it right onto the hand forefinger part of the mitten, and just using my reverse tweezers to help me put it in place. Once I was happy with the placement, I just pressed down, making sure to really adhere that snowflake onto the acetate. Now I'm going to cut out a second mitten out of some acetate. So I'm just doing the exact same thing as last time, cutting around the mitten. And this is because I want to sandwich in my clay bits with acetate on both sides, because I want my snowflakes and the pretty blue clay bits to shine through my mitten, but I also still really want to see my beautiful background. So I'm going to sandwich in my shaker bits with 2 pieces of acetate, and that way you can still see the background and my shaker bits won't get caught on any of the silver that's sticking out on my background, because I use a stencil paste. It's a little thicker than just, adding ink to a background. So that's why I'm going to sandwich them in between. So now I have my 1/8 of an inch foam adhesive, and this is a slightly thicker foam adhesive than a traditional roll or foam adhesive strips, and I use this for shaker cards. And I'm just outlining almost the exact same way that I did my 1/8 of an inch adhesive tape, outlining the mitten, and that way my shaker bits will be inside of my mitten and they can, shake all around the shaker part of the die cut, so that big open area. So now it's time to open up those cute clay pieces. Again, this is the Winter Snowflakes Clay Confetti Mix, and it's my first time using it, so opening it up, and it comes in a nice little Ziploc baggie, so if you don't have containers for your shaker bits, you could still store it in the container. I'm using my little spoon here to help me add in some shaker bits. There are a couple pieces that are clumped together, which it just happens. It's clay, and I don't want it to get stuck in my shaker, so I'm pulling those out. And then just kind of making sure everything is laying flat. They're not a bunch of, snowflakes stacked on top of each other. And then I think that I still have plenty of room, so I'm going to add more clay bits until I'm happy with the mix. I don't want to overload it, but also it's such a big open window. I want to make sure I have enough in there that it's exciting. So now that I have all my bits, I just took that mitten again out of acetate and adhered it to the back, because that double-sided foam adhesive is sticky. How fun is it to listen to a shaker card? So everything is sandwiched in, and there is in a couple spots where my acetate completely covered my foam adhesive, which is totally fine and normal, but I am going to attach this to my background later, so I'm going to add a little bit more foam, or I'm sorry, adhesive tape to where it is no longer sticky because the acetate completely covered the foam adhesive. And then I'm adding some additional foam adhesive to my mitten cuff because I need to make sure I attach those to the background when I get ready to put the card together. So my mitten shaker is ready to go. I made sure that my silver on white cardstock was dry, and I die cut out the winter wishes. I made sure to also grab the little tittles of the eye. I'm going to place it into my little tray here so I don't lose them. But my paper was a little flimsy, and then adding in that stencil paste just made it like kind of not very sturdy. So I wanted to add a second layer of white cardstock to my sentiment. Now, I don't know why I did this the hard way, but I did. I die cut it out of some white cardstock and I was like, oh, I'll just glue them together. So here I'm adding the tittles of the eyes to the white cardstock so they're the same thickness as the rest of my sentiment script. But this would have been so much easier if I just would have used some of my adhesive sheets on the back or the front of my white cardstock because I wanted it on the front so I can attach my silver sentiment, and then I needed it on the back when I glue this to my card. But you know what? I did it the hard way. So if you don't have adhesive sheets, this is a way you can do it. I just have some white cardstock and I didn't punch the sentiment out of the thick white cardstock, and then I added the glue following the script font of the sentiment. And then I'm just going to layer on that silver die cut right on top so that way I can follow the shape. And then when I punch it out, it's so much sturdier this way because there's two layers of cardstock. And the second layer, I used my ultra thick Neenah cardstock, so it's super sturdy. So again, just pulling those out of the white cardstock, and I'm also going to punch out any of the insides that were die cut of, like the E and the S, they have like the inside of the letter. So just using my little pokey tool to poke those out. And there now I have winter wishes and also the tittles of my eye. They're super small, but I see them on my glass mat. And that way they'll be nice and sturdy when I attach them to my background. So I tested my lunar paste. Everything seems to be dry, so we can start assembling the card. I'm going to add my shaker, so I'm pulling off any adhesive backings, and then I'm going to layer on where I'm going to put my winter wishes sentiment, and then that way I know how much room I have for my mitten. So I'm trying to figure out how I want it. Do I want it angled to the right? Do I want it angled to the left? I kind of go back and forth, but I end up really liking it kind of angled more to the left, so the thumb is a little higher, and I stuck that down to my background. And then I'm going to use some wet glue to adhere my sentiment. So similar to how I use wet glue to glue my silver onto my white cardstock, I'm just going to do the same thing for my background. So layering it up, knowing exactly how I want to place everything, and using that fine tip glue to trace the sentiment, that scripty font. And once I have enough glue, I will use my reverse tweezers, and I'm going to hold it on the bottom of the sentiment so that way I can layer it nicely under my mitten. So I have winter, and then I repeat the same process with wishes, layering that under. I do overlap just a tiny bit on the sentiment just because of the spacing, and I just think it's so pretty in that silver, the silver lining stencil paste, the lunar paste is just so pretty. Can't forget the tittles of the eye, so I just took a look at the die cut to make sure I was placing the eyes in the appropriate spot, and just using my, again, fine tip glue pen or glue to put the glue where they need to put the tittles. And then I grabbed a jewel picker, which has like a, not really sticky, but a waxy end, and that allows me to pick up the little die cuts and place them where I want them to, which is on top of the glue on above my sentiment. So there is that one little spot on the top right that didn't have any type of background. So I'm just grabbing my stencils and adding a little bit of color. So I added a tiny snowflake with Salvaged Patina and then a couple little dots with some white ink. I'm just using the leftover ink on my applicators, and it was able to add a little bit more to that corner because it was kind of plain. It needed a little something. Since my craft piece of cardstock is 3x6 for a mini slimline, I wanted to add a little bit of a white border and also make sure anything that stuck out of the edges of my craft cardstock could have something to stick to. So my card base is okay, I just wanted to shake it one more time. My card base is, once folded, it is 3 1/4 by 6 1/4. So it is measured at 6 1/4 by 6 1/2. And then I scored it in the middle to get that 3 1/4. Here are some final looks of my beautiful blue, silver, and white shaker card. I really love how it turned out. The new products from Pretty Pink Posh are just so awesome. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!